and other stakeholders can put in place to eradicate child labor in the mining sector? Hello?
Question, I'd like to address it. Yes. So acts and some research is done by the government and other institutions and governing bodies in our countries or in Africa as a whole, would realize that UNESCO and UNICEF and other international bodies have come on board pertaining to child labor activities. And ideas or this research about how to stop or limit child labor can be effectively monitored. For instance, the Ghana right and administrative justice, and also the punitive measures for people who let their children go out there to involve themselves in liberal activities. However, how effective are these policies running? How effective are these measures being implemented? Or who is in charge of monitoring these activities? So I would say that instead of me to bring out ideas about how the government or the stakeholders would rather, what the stakeholders are supposed to rather do to prevent this, I would rather look at it in a different way, where we would rather find measures about how to implement these policies. For instance, we can organize, the institutions can organize boot camps for community leaders, for parents, for even teachers in these rural areas supposed to do by child labor activities in our communities. Wow. Now, we know that in Ghana or in Africa, most of the time, teachers and students are supposed to have a relationship where the teacher is supposed to know the welfare and the world every student of his or hers. Now, if a teacher is there and after some, the teacher can take the bold step on campus. Now, when you find out that this child is engaging in illegal mining activity or is being used for any child labor duty in any of the mining communities, now they will just proceed to take the legal process that is supposed to be why is using such a child for such activities. So Veronica, I think we should rather start looking at how best we can rather implement the policies that have been made by the governing bodies and the individuals who have researched and the NGOs who have researched into child labor, and then the recommendations that they brought about. We should rather look at how best we can implement these policies rather than bringing out new ideas or new policies about how to curb child labor activities in the mining sector.
Great, but if these policies are, so this is a follow-up to what you just said. So if these policies are already there, recommendations, studies have been done, recommendations have been made, and they are not being implemented. The question the question that comes up is why? Why are we not implementing them? What is the challenge? For someone with your experience, with a first-hand experience in the mining sector, what do you think are some of the factors mitigating against the implementation of some of these policies? Why are teachers not committed to seeing students in school? So if they know their students is in the pits, why are they not taking any action on it? If you could shed some light on that?
Okay, I wouldn't, thank you for the question. I wouldn't base everything on ignorance, but what I can say is, for instance, a teacher would feel the parent is in charge of taking care of the child. So whether whether the student comes to school or not, it doesn't really affect his or her performance. So I think it's high time the youth put up seminars, capacity building for this community leaders, children, labor activities in the mining sector. This is because we know they check up on these kids. Every teacher application running away from school in order to involve in mining activities. This can let the teachers have a broad idea about the harm that they are causing to the children if they don't rather follow up and find out about the welfare of these children. Also, coming to community leaders and parents, they also play a very vital role. I mean, most of these mining areas have been headed
Hello. It seems Prosper has disconnected, so we'll wait briefly for him to rejoin the discussion. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, kindly put it in the chat, and then I will ask Prosper when he returns to the discussion. Thank you. Hello, Prosper.
Yes, I'm very sorry. I'm in a very remote area, so my network keeps going on and off. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, so you can continue where you were talking about community leaders, I think.
Yes, yes. So the community leaders play a very vital role in monitoring these children as well. So I think we should rather let the community leaders know, let them know the importance, and this can be done by the youth. And that's why I'm even very happy that African students and the Youth Summit has brought such an important topic out. I mean, we can organize seminars and capacity building for these community leaders as well. Also, looking at the aspects where these kids who are engaging in these activities because of addiction, we can also tackle that aspect where we organize counseling and therapies for them. I mean, let's talk to these kids. Let them know the side effects of whatever they are doing, the negative impacts of drugs or drug abuse on their life. I would also suggest that most of our legal practitioners in Africa nowadays are the youth, are the young ones, and they can take up this mantle to do pro bono cases for these children, help them fight for their rights, make sure that we coordinate and enforce the legal frameworks that, as I was saying, sorry, before the network went bad, I want to also encourage most of the young legal practitioners in Africa to help to enforce that the legal framework that protects these children in the mining areas are strongly coordinated in such a way that a lawyer can go the young lawyers can go into these environments or these communities in Africa where most of these children are involved in child labor activities and try to let prosecute those who are taking advantage of these children and exploiting them for these various exercises. We shouldn't always wait for the government to implement certain things before we take actions. There are some actions that we, the youth, have to arise and take up. Some of these responsibilities, when we, the youth, take it up, it's not illegal. It's very, very legal for any lawyer to prosecute someone who is using a child for child labor activities on any mining site in Africa.
Interesting. So according to some reports, during the school closures, at the height of the pandemic, when schools were closed, some parents had no choice but to take their children along to the mining pits because they did not want to leave them unsupervised at home. So in such situations, how do you handle it? When a parent takes a child along to his or her working site because there's no one at home to supervise them, would you recommend prosecution of such a parent, or are there alternative ways of handling such issues? What is your take on this?
Well, this is a very tricky question. I think I'll look at it in this way. If they take the children along to sit somewhere whilst they work, it's okay just to have an eye on the child. Yes, but then when the child is involved in that activity, I don't think it's laudable. You can't use the excuse that there's no one to look after the child at home to be the reason why you want the child to follow you to a mining pit or onto a galamsey site, and you end up using the child for the activity. The child can go there and wait for you at a safe spot where you can keep an eye on the child. But if you involve that child in the activity, you need to be prosecuted. You need to face the law. We shouldn't try to sugarcoat it. I mean, it's high time we even educate our women. We should involve our women in fighting against child labor. Because most often, I think we follow our mothers every time more than our fathers. So if our mother is also going to get involved in mining activities, we should let them understand that there are so many ways of taking care of the child. You can leave the child with a neighbor, give the child an assignment to perform or a homework to do whilst you are away working to bring some money back home for them to feed on. So I don't think we should use that as an excuse to let our siblings, younger siblings, be involved in mining activities whilst they are not supposed to be.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your contributions to the discussion. I believe Joyce has joined us now. So I'll give her the opportunity to say a few words about the topic we are discussing, and then if she has any comments about some of the proposals you've made by Prosper, we also welcome that. So Joyce, if you're there, kindly share your perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joyce, and then I work with the Youth Bridge Foundation. So in relation to, my apologies for joining in late. I think I got the wrong links to the meeting, so my apologies. So I couldn't hear much of the discussions earlier. But in relation to the theme, the discussions for our roundtable, I think as I heard from Prosper's last comment, at times we may forget certain things and then we think it's normal to do certain things. So for instance, if let's say a parent is going to the site, the mining site, and then he or she sends a child, there are certain things that they will let the child do not out of ignorance, but at times some of these things become a norm, that we don't pay attention to the effects that it comes to the child. So I was in the roundtable for agric, and then one of the discussions that came up, and I think it's important we all pay attention to, is the fact that we need to be clear in some of the policies that direct some of these issues. So for instance, if you say child labor, how do we as Ghanaians, how do we as the natives, how do we understand it? And then how does the policy take into consideration some of these social and then traditional norms that underpin some of the practices? So for instance, if within a particular context, we feel that a child can, and then I was going through the Child Acts of Ghana, and then I realized there's a part that they said that I think when a child is 13 years, the person can do light work. So even though the act stipulates what light work is, for me, it's not clear as to the intent of what this light work would bring out, or the effect of this light work on the child. So I think policy should be able to state clearly in terms that making implementation is a bit easier. And then for us as Youth Foundation, one of the things that we always want to stress is the fact that, so for instance, if you say child labor, why would a child be taken out to do certain things? So we don't want to accept the usual or the normal narrative that maybe these children are taken to the side to do some of these things because of poverty or because of lack of supervision, like those normal instances. But there are times that, for instance, you have to understand the effect of this on the child, as I mentioned earlier on. So even in the Children's Acts that we have in Ghana, they say that child labor is any form of labor that has an adverse effect on the child, whether psychologically, emotionally. They itemize some of these things. So for instance, even if a parent is going to the market and the parent sends a child, for me, what is the impact of that act on the child? So one of the things that the child seems to lose is quality education. And then let me be clear that if we say education, we are not talking about the formal classroom teaching and learning. There are different forms of educating a child so that the child can be self-sustained when the person grows up. So we should be mindful of some of these things. And then I heard Prosper touch a bit on how we can curb child labor. So for me, I think one of the things we should start talking about is the need for alternatives for the children involved. So when Prosper mentioned that at least you can leave your child with a neighbor, and then let me also mention that this cannot be the context within which certain places can work. So for instance, even though we are looking at the child labor in the mining sector, our mind is drawn into the communities where this communal living is upheld. So then you can take your child to a neighbor and say that, oh, I'm going to the farm, I'll be back, etc. But we are also mindful of some of the negative impacts of some of these activities. So I think for us, there is the need to harness the potential of the youth. So starting right from the onset, the kids, we need to pay attention to their well-being. So if there is the need to develop a child in a certain model, so not just, as I mentioned earlier on, the formal way of living life, but there are other aspects that we should pay attention to. So, and then there is also the need for a conversation with lots of stakeholders, not just the ASYS, not just civil society, not just government, but there should be a roundtable where government is there, civil society is there, the private sector is there. So we should have a holistic and then multi-stakeholder engagement about some of these things. Because, for instance, if a child goes to mine at a mine and then the person takes the gold or the diamond or whatever to a buyer, mostly it's a chain, and then it might get to the private sector. So if you are talking about these issues, it's important that we have a roundtable with all these actors involved. So for instance, for us, I would want to share one of our projects that we use to make sure that we have a quality human resource to feed the oil industry. So we have a project in the Western region called the Educate to Innovate with STEM. What we realized was the fact that because the oil sector, there was tallow at that sector, most of the young people, and then if most of the Ghanaians here and even those outside can recall, there was this surge of teenage pregnancy and then the need for the youth to be engaged in the sector. But what we realized was the fact that they lack the capacity to be part of the sector. So we took a study to identify some of the things that we needed to address. So then Tallow, with the help of Tallow Ghana, they funded us to in the Western region. So we had some 21 schools that we are supporting. We gave them capacity development, after school support, practical lessons in the STEM courses. The idea behind this is the fact that if a child does not, in our curriculum, if a child does not pass the English and science, the person does not progress. So the issue about progression is something that we need to take cognizance of, especially when we are looking at child labor. So if a child is stuck, no matter the age, so from KG to KG2, that progression, if it's not there, the probability that we will bring out a chunk of young people or even children with that capacity, and then no direction, and the probability that they will go into some of these things that we are talking about is very high. So there is a need for a multi-stakeholder approach, a discussion, a roundtable discussion. I would be so glad that whilst we are here, we have some of the mining sectors. And then one thing I also want to bring out is that, mostly when we are talking about the child labor in this sector, because of the formal laws that we have, these big companies do not, I would say that most of the time, like 90%, they wouldn't fall victim because they wouldn't go and then employ a child in the official sense. But there could be times that because they would have some of these things in a cheaper way, they'll be tempted to buy from the kids. So I think it's time we bring all of us together to discuss some of these issues and see how we can move ahead in ending it. So for starters, this is my comment for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I want to touch on something you made reference to, and that's on the role of the bigger companies, the multinational corporations. And in the course of preparing for this discussion, I came across a report which indicated that with the when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in an increase in demand for digital devices. And this increase in demand meant that children in countries like Congo DR had to work harder to mine lithium, which is a key component of most of these digital devices. And often when we talk about, the mining value chain, our minds do not go to we don't think about the communication sector, the technology sector as part of this value chain that exploits children, cheap labor to get lithium at a very cheap cost to manufacture some of these devices. And so I agree with you when you say that it's important to bring all these stakeholders aboard. We have to look critically at all those who are involved in this value chain and make sure that they are involved in the discussions towards ending this canker of child labor or child exploitation in the mining sector. Building on that, I don't know whether you have anything else to say about the role of the private sector, because you mentioned how Talo supported to some schools in the Western region. And so what role do you think the private sector can play, directly or indirectly, in addressing some of these challenges at the community level, not necessarily those in the mining sector, but those who even benefit indirectly from the outputs of the mining sector?
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's important that we have a coordinated approach to this issue. So what the private sector can do, and then as I stated earlier on, it's not just a one-way approach. We as civil society or as advocacy groups, we need to carve our messages in a certain way. So for instance, if you bear witness to the fact that in Ghana, there are certain issues that come up in the media, and then there seems to be a diversion in the approaches, the attention, and then the alliances. So certain people will not necessarily feel that it's okay for a child to do certain things. But at times, the way we couch the messages, the way we do the advocacy. So for instance, you can't go into a community and then you neglect some of their fundamentals, some of their traditions, and say that, oh, why would you take your child to the farm? It's child labor, so stop. So the way we go about some of these things. So for instance, as I said earlier on, a private sector might benefit from this activity, directly or indirectly. Because if the child goes and then gets the gold, the lithium, the diamond, etc., and come to sell it even to an individual at a cheaper price, where would the individual, unless the person is using it for his or her own individual something, the person would have to go and sell it to a bigger company or something, because usually we have the middlemen who use some of these cases to get the products as a cheaper cost and sell to these private sector. So I think, one, we should create awareness on the impact of some of these activities on the kids, the impact of some of these activities on the society as a whole, the impact of this activity on the future generation. So for now, a child might go through and be okay, but if we want to have a sustainable development, how do we ensure that from the initial stage, a child is brought up in a way that the person does not become a burden on society? So then civil society can work with private sector to initiate certain awareness campaign. So it could be creating awareness on the need for us to pay attention to what we are doing, not necessarily saying that it's good or bad, but we need to give it a second thought and then know the impact of these things on the children, on the society, and then as we forge ahead as a country or as a community. So I think in this regard, this is how we can engage the private sector to draw the attention to that challenge we are having as a society, and then together we can forge ways and partner to make sure that this is ended.
Great. Thank you so much, Joyce. I will now go to the participants. If there's anyone who wants to ask a question or has a contribution, you're welcome to do so now before we go to the concluding remarks. Is there anyone with a question? Does anyone have a question they want to ask or a contribution to the discussion?
Veronica?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Geoffrey here. My name is Geoffrey Nsubuga from Uganda. Actually, I have a mixed feeling because I thought I was invited to give a speech, but nevertheless, I have the opportunity to say something. I want to start with the issue of the private sector. I work with an organization called Somero Uganda, and we are implementing programs around mining. And I am also the master scrum trainer for the International Labour Organization on issues to do with elimination of child labor. Just to take to give a snapshot, when we look at issues of private sector, you realize that we do not have, as Africa, we are not having user organizations. When it comes to mining, most of the user organizations are out of Africa. So this means that majority of people who are buying the mines that are here are got from Africa, are middlemen or just individual businessmen. So this leaves a lot of gap when it comes to issues of protection. And you realize that the companies, the user companies already have line. But what is so annoying is that you find that these policies are followed when they are in Europe, but when you come to Africa, they are not followed, and yet this is their supply chain. So then this becomes an issue for us that we need to put in mind when we are thinking of how best can we create synergies. These people need to come on board, and they also get to know that where they are getting, we are part of their supply chain. And if this is not something that is dealt with, then there are going to be a lot of issues. Two, you realize that we have a lot of artisanal miners. These artisanal miners are not formalized. So you find that they are scattered, and they are doing things their own way. And you might agree with me that when it comes to artisanal miners, they depend so much on household labor. And this brings in children, because in Africa, most of this, it's either women or children. So this makes the women more vulnerable, and it is increasingly leading to issues of child labor within our areas. Coming to what can we do, I think that we need to also tap into the structure of the tripartite structure, which takes on tripartite plus, which takes on the trade union. I think we need to tap into the existing trade unions in our African countries, and we try to see how best can we influence their members to be able to mind about issues of elimination of child labor in their supply chain. One thing that I also sit at National Steering Committee on Elimination of Child Labor in Uganda, and one thing that I've always tried to push is to see that the products have a commitment statement that this product is a child labor free. They are certified products, and before they come to the market. And then people will buy these products when they are very comfortable that these are child labor free products. Where we put these statements on cigarettes, on beer, and so on, this could be also a motivation issue that we can also bring up as a platform and see how we can move. At a global level, I also think it's time that we tap into the existing platforms. How can we, as African countries, bring together our voices and work together to push our governments? There's the ILO Convention 123 on underground work. So how do we have all our governments ratify it? Because then we'll be talking on an informed view, and we'll be able to roll down these ideas into our communities. issues of policy, cross-powers policy, have got a number of policies, but these policies are also hindered by social protection. Even if you bring a policy, but you do not mind about the social protection of the households, then how are you expecting that the communities are going to move away from the hazardous and harmful employment of children? Because this is the work they are doing is not giving them enough. The artisanals themselves also need to be brought together and formalized and educated, so that we can also look at alternative kinds of labor provision. One thing that I think about, that when we are creating synergies, we have to think, how do we have labor intensive methodologies of mining? Because mining is not going to stop. But how do we have labor-intensive methodologies so that they are promoted in African countries and African communities that have mining in particular? Then we will be able to see our communities progressing and meaningfully coming up, provide to eliminate child labor, issues of child labor. I would also wish to see that our governments are engaged, because this is a strong platform. Students and youth have a very big voice. So if we can match out to write papers and information on platforms onto different governments, so that they can make commitments and we see that they roll down. So when we are together, we can move bigger steps to see that governments in Africa are also contributing to, are also leading to their commitments. And lastly, COVID-19 is here. We made a report that showed an increment of 30% in issues of child labor during the COVID-19 period, the lockdown and so on. Children were all over. Children are on street. They are not in schools and so on. But because the social protection mechanisms are totally rotten, when they were in position to run on the street, they are hawking eggs, they are hawking whatever, and majority of them, if we will tell you what is happening in Uganda, over 50% of the children who went out of school are now pregnant. So you realize which kind of exploitation this is. So we also need to now tailor our interventions towards what COVID has brought in, and we see how best can we have implementations that are meaningful and helpful to the children. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Your intervention has been timely. My apologies for not inviting you earlier, but I think your intervention has in a way summed up everything that has been discussed and even enhanced it further. So the issue of social protection, the issue of education, engaging the structures at national, global levels, ensuring that the supply chains are tightened, the laws are respected on both sides, and I mean you have really hit on all the key points that have been raised. Thank you so much for the intervention. I would now invite all of you, if you have any concluding statements, to make them now so that we wrap up on this session. So starting with Prosper, if you have some concluding statements. Do we have Prosper? Otherwise, Joyce. Hello, Joyce. Yeah, so do you have any concluding statements?
Hi, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. There's a need for education of the young people to understand some of these issues. And then also there's the need for us to give out information in a way they can accept, they can understand, and then they can use. So when the last speaker was speaking, he made reference to the fact that most of the African countries have ratified certain international that what is in the policies are actually what's the youth to understand the policy so that they are able to demand accountability from policymakers. This will be my conclusion remarks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for ensuring that the conventions that have been ratified are implemented, domesticated, and implemented at the country level. Is Prosper there?
Yes, I'm back. My network
Right,
is back
so
again.
I understand your concluding statements.
I would like to urge the youth, in as much as we are all advocates for child labor, demolishing child labor, I wanted to admonish all of us that in as much as we can, wherever we find ourselves, the legal practitioners, those with the NGOs, the engineers, we should find a way to handle this issue wherever we find it. To do it for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prosper, and thank you to all of you for joining this session. It's been a very interesting discussion. We've had a lot of key points, key proposals that we will certainly have to take forward. I thank you for your participation and wish you the very best until we meet again on a similar platform. Thank you very much.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.